Incredulous, Chapter 7. Everything is under control. The Illuminati. Quote, the only thing that saves us from bureaucracy is its inefficiency. End quote. Eugene J. McCarthy. That cool looking robotic armor you guys were wearing, what was that? Joshua asked as he examined Tarek's helmet with the storm shield down. Having served as a Marine Recon Ranger, I would really like to use one someday. The armored robotic suits we were wearing are called exoskeletons. They are full body armor, wearable robots, explained Tarek. The very first exoskeleton designs were worn by our grunts. I never did find out why the Marine Corps infantry were referred to as grunts, said Joshua, a puzzled look on his face. Neither did I, admitted Tarek. I'd always thought the word grunt was a spin-off of the term ground pounders because of all the forced marches Marines are ordered to undertake. God, I hated forced marches, admitted Joshua, examining the flexible section of the body armor. These platelets remind me of Japanese samurai armor I've seen in museums. Upon examining the museum exhibit closer, I realized that each plate was actually a coin. They'd incorporated coins with a hole in the center to create a fish scale effect. It was simple and very effective. We call that dragonhide because of its unique configuration of titanium storic platelets, said Tarek. Storic is a vacuum injected, honeycombed fabric designed to absorb impacts. In this fish scale configuration, dragonhide has the ability to be more flexible. It disperses the energy of a projectile more effectively due to the greater number of surfaces that can withstand an impact. The second layer of defense behind all movable joints is the liquid layer that hardens when impacted. Tarek placed the flexible section of armor against the bulkhead and struck it hard. If you take a hit, your movement will be restricted at that joint momentarily, he said as he tossed it to Joshua. I see what you mean, said Joshua as he struggled to flex the joint. He continued trying to bend it and noticed that the elasticity returned after a few seconds. I see that nothing on these exoskeletons is shiny or reflective, commented Joshua. This type of exoskeleton is used when stealth is required, explained Raven. Most of the exoskeletons are shiny. Knights like to distinguish themselves with colorful emblems. Should you ever be injured, microbots within the armor perform basic first aid functions. Airbags surround each extremity. When activated, the airbags will effectively stop the bleeding without cutting off circulation, unless the limb is amputated. In case of death or loss of consciousness, the artificial intelligence computer takes over and either continues to assist in the fight or returns your body to base, explained Tarek. They can also become immobile, like a cast, preventing further damage to an area. I wish we could have worn armor like that when I was in combat. Although I tried to be a good Marine, my heart was just not in the wars we were fighting, confessed Joshua, shaking his head slowly. These were not the glorious battles I remember reading about in my youth. I had hoped to one day fight to liberate the oppressed. Sadly, I discovered that the battles we fought only lined the oppressors' pockets. It was difficult to justify shooting at young boys who were trying to protect the shithole they called home. We were truly the unwilling, led by the unqualified to do the impossible for the ungrateful. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, kept coming to mind, added Joshua. To this day it troubles me. I shared these concerns during my confessions, but nothing the Father Confessor ever said brought me peace of mind. And now I fear that on Judgment Day I may be called to account for my actions. Being a warrior priest myself, perhaps I can shed some light on the subject, said Tarek, placing a comforting hand on Joshua's shoulder. You're not the first warrior, nor the last, to be troubled by the sixth commandment. This well-known directive from God is just one of many horribly mangled translations in the Bible. The Hebrew word used in the original Torah is ratzach, meaning premeditated murder. The sixth commandment specifically prohibits premeditated murder, the taking of the life of an innocent. The sixth commandment does not prohibit the taking of the life in defense of oneself or others. The Hebrew word to kill, harag, which aside from manslaughter encompasses everything from justifiable homicide to the taking of an enemy soldier's life in combat. I too was a Marine, confided Jared, though I wasn't crazy enough to be recon. My pain tolerance level just wasn't high enough. Of the Rangers I knew, pain just didn't seem to affect those guys. I couldn't decide if they were incredibly courageous or just plain insane. You know there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. You may not wear the uniform, but the attitude's still there, added Joshua. Before enlisting, I discovered that the Marines did not accept people with low scores on military evaluation tests, explained Tarek. The Marines' flashy image and the fact that there are only about 100,000 troops during peacetime means that they can afford to be picky. Knowing this about them, I made the assumption that the majority of Marines would be intelligent. Shaking his head, he added, sadly, I discovered that most just wanted a steady paycheck. The rest were there because the judge had given them an ultimatum, either that or prison. My biggest surprise, however, was seeing United States Marines panic in simulated combat situations. As a sergeant, I had to make my rounds and check the troops guarding the perimeter. Once, during an exercise, I approached the post. I could clearly see the outline of the private silhouetted against the smoke of green flares. He was covering his field of fire. I approached from behind and called out his name. To my horror, he spun around and emptied his entire magazine on me. During boot camp, do you recall your drill instructors constantly bellowing out, "The most dangerous thing in the world is a Marine with an M16?" asked Joshua. We never got tired of hearing it, but it turns out that the most dangerous thing in the world is a private with a loaded weapon. Tarek, should I decide to fully commit myself to your cause, what exactly is it you expect from those you command? I expect a lot more from the knights under my command than I do from the grunts. The concept of the exoskeleton is an attempt to get the most out of every individual warrior's capabilities. It is tailor-made to amplify all your strengths. During my tour in the military, I quickly recognized that most officers were nothing more than petty tyrants who demanded much of others. A good commander demands much of himself. Among the grunts are seasoned warriors who desire nothing more than to follow a competent leader into battle. I do not promote men who have no desire or ability to lead. I have never forced anyone to take command. On the other hand, some men seek power because they seem to need it. I never allow those fools to command. So, who is it you battle against? Most of our skirmishes are with pirates. Our main enemy, however, is an ancient one. You may have heard of them. They call themselves the Illuminati. You'll usually find them boasting of their family pedigree, their intelligence, or their enormous wealth. Although they tend to show great favoritism towards members of their secret brotherhood, they have no love for their fellow man. Control is what they seek, and those whom they cannot silence or control, they imprison or destroy. For the most part, we simply evade them. My espionage teams are not sure exactly what the Illuminati's next major move is going to be, but our nation has been on alert for some time now, said Tarek. Whatever it is, the United States Department of Homeland Security is calling it Endgame, and you can be certain it will be conducted on a massive scale. At present, they've stockpiled hundreds of thousands of incendiary coffins. Each can accommodate 3 body bags and will burn until nothing's left. The goal of Endgame is the militarized removal of all suspected or potential terrorists, illegal aliens, conscientious objectors, and outspoken undesirables who protest the government's actions. We took the liberty of checking, and you've made the list on several of the fusion facilities. I'm a priest. Why would I be on a list of potential terrorists? Protested Joshua. Well, for starters, you're ex military, said Terry, examining the computer readout. Then there's an incident when you attended a Ron Paul gathering and had the audacity to slap one of his bumper stickers to your vehicle. U.S. Army Field Manual FM 19-15 specifies that the Army must develop personnel who are able to perform distasteful duties. At this moment, thousands of U.S. and foreign troops are stateside for the purpose of implementing martial law under Endgame. These soldiers are under no delusion. They know they will be required to fire upon unarmed American civilians. Is it any wonder U.S. troops have such a high suicide rate? The Nazis encountered similar suicide rates among their SS troops. Thousands were reported to have killed themselves due to the difficulty of performing their distasteful duties. Turk turned the screen horizontally and handed it to Joshua, who read from the writings of George Washington, Volume 36. I have read much of the nefarious and dangerous plan of the Illuminati. It was not my intention to doubt that doctrines of the Illuminati and principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am. Joshua started to set the pad down, then noticed that the layout of the keyboard display was very unusual. Why is the keyboard in such a weird arrangement? He asked. You mean, why isn't it in the QWERTY arrangement? Asked Raven. What is the QWERTY arrangement? Inquired Joshua. The common name for the standard keyboard layout is QWERTY, because the first 6 keys starting from the top left, Q, W, E, R, T, Y, spell out this name, explained Raven. Few people are aware that when typewriters were first invented, they had different arrangements or layouts for the individual keys. Key jamming was a major problem with those old-style typewriters. Typists were simply too fast. Try as they might, engineers could not solve the problem of the metal stamping arms catching one another. The solution? Reconfigure the key layout into the most difficult typing system imaginable. By the time electric typewriters were invented, solving the original problem, the QWERTY system had become a sacred cow. It has remained unaltered to this day. I've always wondered why the setup was so screwy. You'd think that the most often used keys would be located at the index fingers and the least used keys would be regulated to the pinkies and ring fingers. Reading the pad once more, Joshua asked, so the Illuminati have been infiltrating the U.S. since its founding. Are you guys out to save America or something? If we thought the U.S. could have been saved, most of our citizens would still be part of it, answered Raven apologetically. This was an emotionally charged subject for her. As I said, the main reason the exoskeletons were developed was to enhance our combat performances, said Tarek, donning his helmet. Even with the storm shield down, I can see perfectly because of the surgical implants that are feeding visual information to my brain. This armor can also withstand lethal dosages of radiation. Our intelligence units discovered that governments who have the neutron bomb, like Britain and the US, are prepared to use the weapon if population control gets out of hand. Once irradiated, you can survive in the unit for several days, but the exoskeleton will have to be disposed of properly. These units are completely sealed and can be easily modified for underwater use, if necessary. We had to seal them to guard against the new race-specific bioweapons the US is developing. I know this is difficult for you to accept, Joshua. You don't possess a mob mentality, said Raven. When an injustice is committed, it is difficult for you to remain silent about it. You have an unshakable sense of right and wrong. I can tell this about you simply by observing your aura. By your very nature, you are a threat to these people. Having been a Marine, I'm sure you are familiar with the Korean War. But few are aware that the Koreans interrogated prisoners of war in order to determine what prison they would be sent to. If a POW had a reason for living or an ideal they strove towards, they were placed in a maximum security prison camp. If the POW had no dreams or ambitions, if they simply got drafted and went along with the crowd, they were placed in minimum security prisons. No one ever escaped from a minimum security camp. I wonder what would happen to you if studying scripture became an offense to the government. Would you denounce your faith to save your hide, Joshua? Joshua snickered and retorted, You're talking about the Antichrist and the apocalypse. I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon. Joshua, it may surprise you to learn that during World War II, many Bible students lost their lives in the Nazi death camps for that very crime. As a follower of the Christ, Terry confided, I'm forced to admire the faith and tenacity of those 5,000 men and women. Oddly enough, the Germans regarded these individuals as voluntary prisoners. To be absolved of the crime, all one had to do was denounce his faith and sign a declaration document promising to submit to the authority of the Third Reich. According to official Nazi records, the crime for which they were imprisoned was noted as Bibelforscher. They were guilty of being Bible students. A large purple triangular badge identified these conscientious objectors in much the same way that the Jews were identified with the yellow Star of David. The purple badge was by far the largest of the badges, so that it would stand out. Anyone wearing this badge was to be avoided. If anyone was caught listening to a Bible forsher, it would not go well for them. The Nazis noted that these troublemakers ministered to the injured and shared their food, knowing that they would be punished for doing so. Raven bit her lower lip as she tried to think of another way to explain herself. Joshua, when stupidity is considered a form of patriotism, intelligence will be viewed as a treasonous act. During the Bush administration, conscientious objectors were regarded as terrorist sympathizers. Should the United States ever impose martial law, orders are in place for soldiers to round up all suspected terrorists, conscientious objectors, and outspoken undesirables. When faced with such prospects, one has to wonder how many Christians would gladly denounce their faith and sign any document in order to get out of such a hellhole. I see what you mean, Raven, said Joshua. Tarek, do you recall when Asmodeus spoke of Enoch? I thought there were no surviving copies of the Book of Enoch. In fact, the church considered removing the Book of Jude from the New Testament because it quoted so heavily from the Book of Enoch. According to legend, the Book of Enoch was one of the books preserved by Noah himself, said Tarek. In fact, it was required reading during Jesus' time. The Essenes cherished it, and so did the Jews and early Christians. After Jesus, or perhaps because of his constantly quoting from the book, it was condemned. denounced and banned by both rabbis and early church fathers. The book remained lost for thousands of years until a Scottish explorer discovered 3 copies of it in Ethiopia. I was not aware Jesus quoted so much from the Book of Enoch. How could you, if you had no idea the book even existed and no understanding of what it said? Tarek observed. If he quoted from it, why would the early church fathers ban it? That's a long story. The long and the short of it is that they simply didn't like what Jesus had to say. How could that be true? Asked Joshua. This may come as a shock to you, Joshua, but Christianity was not begun by Jesus and his disciples, countered Tarek. Christianity was begun by a Roman named Saul of Tarsus, who had taken it upon himself to hunt down and execute the followers of Jesus. After his conversion, Saul recruited Gentiles, and I believe Gnostics as well, to form his new religion. In time, the Gentile churches grew faster, wealthier, and larger than the group of believers in Jerusalem, led by the original disciples. The Jewish followers of Jesus proved troublesome for this new religion, so the Christians branded them heretics. And you might as well know right now that I am one of those heretics. Keep in mind that Jesus never instructed his disciples to go around creating new churches or appointing priests. Jesus taught that God spoke to you directly and that you should obey what God put in your heart. For this reason, I could no longer remain a priest of a church that followed the teachings of the Apostle Paul, aka Saul of Tarsus. That's why you left? Asked Joshua. Why do you believe the church doesn't allow you to follow what God puts in your heart? Raven looked at the young priest incredulously. You're kidding, right? Most churches want to control every aspect of your life. If you do something the preacher doesn't like, you'll soon hear about it, usually through a sermon directed at you. Mayday, Mayday. We are helpless and drifting. Please render assistance. The AI computer channeled the distress call through the ship's comm, interrupting the conversation. A Mayday call is sent out over channels that are monitored by the Coast Guard, military, and all ocean-going vessels at given intervals every hour. Maritime law states that any vessel receiving a Mayday must respond immediately unless one's own life is placed in danger. Mayday was a corruption of the French "Venez m'aider", meaning "come help me". The ship began to decelerate. Puzzled, Tarrant looked at Raven. He knew that running submerged, the Defiant's radios should not have been set to those frequencies. He thought for a second, then ordered Monique to bring the ship about, locate the vessel, and shadow her. "Is that wise, Commander?" asked Raven. "We have no idea who could be on board." "The question we should be asking is, how the hell did we pick up that distress call in the first place?" "Hypnotica is linked with the ship's AI computer. She must have been monitoring all channels." Tarek thought for a moment and ordered, "All right, I want everybody prepped and ready to get wet in 10 minutes." "Aye, aye, sir," the crew responded in unison.